All right, good morning, good day, good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm going to jump right into this because I'm going to do a hard stop at page 30 since this chapter is a little bit longer. And we're going to do chapter 3, ESP, a threat to COMSEC, a survey of open literature. After I get to page 30, if you're reading this document on your own, you'll notice that after page 30, they give a few testimonials incorporated into this chapter. What I'm going to do is just pull out a graphic that I put together to sort of try to demystify, for lack of a better term, demystify the complexity of this with a visual graphic. Obviously, it's a confabulated document that I put together based on my interpretation of my understanding. But you know, sometimes graphics and drawings and things like that do help further communicate things to people, keeping in mind that it's not meant to be any sort of final authority on the interpretation. It doesn't really try to describe anything in too much detail, but I will add commentary to the graphic that I created as it references what I've learned from this stuff, and not just this document, but, you know, a couple hundred different documents at least, plus, you know, multiple forms of literature, old and new, and old and contemporary knowledge and stuff published. So let me just jump into chapter 3, which we're on 24 here. Sorry if that makes some of the viewers dizzy. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3, ESP, a threat to COMSEC, a survey of open literature. The author surveys open literature to determine whether there is acceptable scientific proof of the existence of the parapsychological phenomena, herein described as telepathy and clairvoyance, and classed under the general heading of extrasensory perception, ESP in parentheses, and to determine whether such phenomena, if they exist, constitute a significant threat to the COMSEC equipments, devices, and materials of the United States, or to the classified information protected by such equipments, devices, and materials. Experimental difficulties and deficiencies. Many, if not most, reputable scientists have been skeptical as to the scientifically provable existence of phenomena which could be adequately demonstrated to satisfy the current definitions of telepathy and clairvoyance. Some of the reasons for their disbelief include the difficulty of isolating a phenomenon which, if it exists, would be subject to extreme variations caused by human factors, such as boredom, fear, and mere whim. The lack of precision in the definition of the talent under study, and the scarcity of clear manifestations of the psychic talent to be tested. Some skepticism also resulted from frequently inconclusive results of experiments, and the inability of trained experimenters to develop repeatable experiments showing a continuing high rate of ESP performance. It has been suggested that when a psychic, a person alleged to have ESP talent, of considerable reputation is involved, this problem was the result of testing under environmental conditions not tailored to the peculiar needs of the talent being tested. So let's stop right there. So they pretty much admit to the skepticism and the difficulty in what they were originally trying to do, later sort of identifying what I think most of us, again, understand intuitively. You know, we don't like doing anything unless we're comfortable. I'm not going to expound any further on that, but just to sort of lower this down to an approachable notion. If you work in architecture, if you work in an office, if you work at you drive all day, or whatever it is that you're doing consistently, you often start to, like a dog will get down and start to do circles around where it wants to sit, or a cat will need a towel or need a pillow or need a blanket in an effort to make the blanket comfortable for them and sort of make it their own space. On a larger scale, we might do that by decorating, putting ornaments around, putting trinkets, totems, pictures of things that remind us of other places, music, we do any number of things. And then on top of that, on a higher, more what really is an esoteric level, architecture, light, sound, environment, all of those things have a direct effect on us mentally, whether or not we know it or not. And for example, I used to work in retail and marketing, and there was some studies done in shopping grocery stores, the large grocery stores, where a lot of them used to have tiles on the floor, and they would have some centers or grocery stores would have 4-inch, 5-inch tiles. Some would have 1-inch, and in some cases they had what's called VCT tile, which is basically like a plastic type of tile. What they had noticed is when people walked on the smaller tiles using the shopping cart, you got the tick, 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 tick as you're crossing over the tile, the gap in the tile where the grout is. And the smaller the tiles, the more anxious the buyers felt, because it gave them the perception of moving faster or being pushed faster along. And then with the slower tick, it was more annoying. So it'd be like tick, 1 foot, tick, 2 foot. The wheel goes over the tick, tick, tick. So then obviously I think most stores now are either carpeted wood floors or VCT, which is meant to relax you as you move along. However, we know they also employ other techniques where, you have moguls around and signage and all kinds of other things to help guide you. But the entire experience has been dumbed down in a positive way so that it's not so anxious. Yes, they have things called point of purchase and impulse buying and things like that, but the way it used to be, it was much more involved. So that's an example of creating through architecture, through design, facilitating an emotion. You're making people move faster through the lines. Another example, just to give a variation of that, one more if people don't understand what I'm saying. A lot of fast food chains have seats in them, and they're designed to be uncomfortable. I shouldn't say uncomfortable, but they're designed not to keep you there too long, because they want to turn the tables around as quickly as possible for other people to sit down. So you don't have padding, you don't have cushions, you don't have all those things there. They're really designed to give you just a little bit of comfort to finish your meal, and then up and out for the next customers to come in. So significant experiments and observations. The following describes and comments on a few of the more significant ESP experiments which have been conducted and the results which have been obtained. Late in 1961, a small group of scientists formed a research team under the auspices of the Cambridge Research Laboratories, Office of Aerospace Research, United States Air Force, to establish a scientifically unbiased method for testing and evaluating the ESP hypothesis. In their report, the group explained their views and aims as follows. Parapsychology, of which ESP is a branch, is not transitory. The subject is attracting the attention of an increasing number of respected scientists. With reports of significant ESP performances growing in number, it is apparent that the time is fast approaching when objective and emotionally unbiased scientists using rigorous experimental techniques must test the ESP hypothesis in order to make clear the nature of these phenomena to themselves and to the public. Moreover, until a sizable segment of the orthodox scientific community displays the integrity and courage to conduct a series of appropriate experiments and publishes both positive and negative results impartially, the ESP controversy will never be resolved. With this connection in mind, the authors converged on the problem of experimenting in ESP in order to 1. Test their own skills in experimental design by applying them to this little-known area. 2. Develop the knowledge which could lead to intelligent evaluations of existing studies and opinions in the field. 3. Have first-hand ESP testing experience with subjects in a controlled environment. 4. Gain experience in analyzing ESP type responses in a rigorous statistical fashion. And 5. Evaluate various data collection, data reduction, and statistical analysis techniques for the application to ESP data. Repeatable experiments. One of the chief aims of the continuing Air Force studies in this field is to devise a repeatable experiment. As they state in paragraph 3 of their initial report, Opponents of ESP emphasize that a repeatable experiment has never been designed in this field. This standard is justified from a physical sciences standpoint, where repetition of experiments and consistency of results are mandatory and historically have been achievable. No persons who appeared to have any significant ESP capabilities were found by the Air Force team during their first tests. It may be significant that the team confined its tests exclusively to average persons having no prior record of exhibiting ESP talents. It was also noted that little thought was given to the tailoring the test's methods to conditions under which the phenomena might most readily be manifested in the test subjects. The Air Force team makes use of the sheep believers and goat non-believers method developed by Dr. Gertrude Schmelder of the Psychology Department, City College of New York, and R.A. McConnell of the Biophysics Department, University of Pittsburgh. So before I continue on, I think we should really understand and just reference how many different organizations were actively involved in this seriously. And even to the credit of the NSA, the original authors, they're already sort of setting up the reader before they get deeper into the material to be like, we've already addressed everybody's skepticism. We're going to tell you a little bit how we go through the skepticism and then explain how we solved the inability for us to both understand what we need to test and look for and how to test and look for it and measure it, right? Measuring is essentially what science does. It doesn't actually always answer questions. It just measures phenomenon in many, many cases, and then theories develop from those measurements. But rarely, without a lot of backup, do they claim something is true without first having to develop both the modalities and methods for measurement, and then the ability to translate and analyze those measurements into actionable data. And the Air Force, just another reference to the Air Force here, even though this document, if we look right here, it says 1961, so we know that this research was going on before the NSA and CIA took it seriously, I guess, and the fact that the Air Force was already involved, as well as the aerospace research community, from Cambridge Research Laboratories in 1961, shows that those people, if we consider those to be 20, 25 to 30 to 40-year-old people, must have had knowledge and experience in their earlier years with this stuff to be able to bring it to a convincing level in terms of getting research and grants and establishing these groups and organizations and committees to start studying it. So, and then with the Air Force, on a note on that, there's other studies within these documents and in the declassified library that show the Air Force. Some people may remember what gremlins are, the term gremlins, and the Air Force basically established that it were the pilots who, under duress and stress, were actually exhibiting PK events on their own machinery, causing it to fail. So, just to take that to a tangent, imagine a pilot lost their life, and there might be a battle or a major war going on at that time, or a skirmish or something, and after heavily researching whatever may have happened or occurred, the researchers established that there was no enemy attack or enemy fire that caused this machinery to fail, yet we have to go back and tell the public something. What do you think they're going to tell the public when this is all classified? They might tell you that someone was shot down, or just simply the simple line that you hear often is someone died in the line of duty, which is not a lie. It's not it's just a way, I guess, of misattributing the cause and the final scope of it. But, imagine having to contend with that sort of knowledge at the same time as letting a mother or father or brother or sister and someone know that they lost a sibling or a child in a psychic phenomena, right? Or as the result of a psychic phenomena. So here we are, repeatable experiments. One of the chief aims of the continuing Air Force studies in this field is to devise a repeatable experiment. As they state in paragraph 3 of their initial report, opponents of ESP emphasize that a repeatable experiment has never been designed in this field. This standard is justified justified from a physical sciences standpoint, where repetition of experiments and consistency of results are mandatory and historically have been achievable. There's a footnote there. Nothing to describe here. No persons who appeared to have any significant ESP capabilities were found by the Air Force team during their first tests. We did that paragraph. Let's go to repeatable techniques. Schmelder has been partially successful, so we just referenced that. Just to remind you, if you're kind of a one-track mind listener, we established the Air Force team makes use of the sheep and goat non-believers method developed by Dr. Gertrude Schmelder. So now we're on repeatable techniques. Schmelder has been partially successful in developing a repeatable technique which could be used over and over again with consistent results. Over a 3-year period, she tested, using the 5-symbol ESP cards, I think we're all familiar with those, in 6 large-scale experiments. These hypotheses that belief or disbelief in the reality of ESP would incline her subjects to succeed or fail in a task. So here we're referencing chapter 2, the believing community. And I'll just read that sentence again. Over a 3-year period, she tested, using the cards, in 6 large-scale experiments, the hypothesis that belief or disbelief in the reality of ESP would incline her subjects to succeed or fail in the task. Working with decks of cards placed in another room or locked in a closet, she consistently obtained higher scores from those who believed in ESP. So right here, I think she just basically contradicted her. She contradicted the Air Force's test pretty quickly, or at least the Air Force's initial tests. On one series of more than 4,000 tests, the sheep deviated from the chance expectation of plus 614, and the goats deviated by minus 301. Okay, there's a reference to her book or her study. Dr. Schmelder was not contending that her own experiment was needed to prove the ESP hypothesis. In her own report, ESP and Personality, she explains why so many scientists are still unconvinced, uncareful reading, lack of knowledge of experiments with tightly controlled conditions such as those performed by Pratt and Woodruff in 1939. So here again we have another date where one scientist is referencing earlier research, and this is going to 1939. She also points to phenomenal scores under conditions of considerable distance, such as those obtained by B.F. Rees in 1937. And then we have, I think, an anecdote here. So, subject lived about a quarter of a mile from him. She, subject, agreed to stay while she made her responses in a room which faced away from his house. Out of 1,850 responses using the 5-symbol ESP cards, where chance expectation was 370 successes, they obtained a number of successes that was 1,349. So that's way above average a guess or being lucky. So just to repeat that, out of 1,850 responses, successes were 1,349, and the chance expectation was 370. So that's 3 times the chance expectation, just say, or 4 times almost, really, over 4 times. Schmelder's examples and her experiments are impressive. However, she still neglects environmental selectivity in the testing of a well-defined talent. So here we have the author now addressing all of it, including hers with the Navy's, or the Air Force rather. The Pratt-Woodruff experiments referred to by Dr. Schmelder were particularly impressive. Under very well-controlled conditions, where the tester was not even aware of the success of the subject and the results were locked in a box, on 2,400 runs of ESP cards, the subject scored results against which the odds of chance happening were in 500,000. Noted psychic. Between 1952 and 1955, Dr. Andrzej Puark, MD, conducted experiments on a noted psychic. One of the more interesting experiments was described as follows. The electrical target was a random generator pulsed by a big cosmic ray showers and a moving paper graph recorded on an on-switching period of 10 seconds. This provided an electrical target appearing in a random sequence which followed a poison distribution. The subject was separated from the electrical target by a distance of 0.3 miles. The subject was further shielded from the electrical target by being stored inside the double Faraday cage. Mrs. Garrett, the psychic, was asked to call the arrival time of the cosmic ray pulse that activated the pen and was allowed 15 seconds after the target in which to qualify for a hit. In Group 5 of the test experiment of Project 4, there appeared a total of 59 targets, and these were distributed in the poison series with a mean of 0.475. In relation to these targets, Mrs. Garrett made 61 calls distributed in the session with a mean of 0.491. Okay, so she was above. Statistical analysis of Group 5 yielded a critical ratio of 4.87 with a probability of 0.000001, or odds against chance of 1,000,000 to 1. The uncharged caged control experiment yielded a critical ratio of 0.08, or chance expectation. The critical ratio of difference between these two experiments is 0.4, p equals 0.000005. This result was considered statistically significant and argued for extrasensory cognition on the part of Mrs. Garrett. However, because of the possibility that large cosmic ray showers could simultaneously strike the target area and the call area, it was felt that the evidence for non-electrical interaction was incomplete. That's fair to say, I think. However, I think they're just more or less closing gaps on potential weaknesses in it. But I think the experiment, being able to predict particles, solar particles hitting, an electrical cable or a wire or an antenna, and then that registering on a pen, shows that there is a waveform occurring either from the person or the person is connecting to that wave, that natural waveform, which I think I've mentioned in the chapter 1, which some people reference as scalar or EMF waves or some sort of microwave to that effect. The controls for the experiment, as they are represented by the doctor, seem to be good. The experiment appears to be tailored to Mrs. Garrett's talent. The results appear to be significant evidence in favor of the ESP hypothesis, except for the qualification made in the last sentence quoted above, which, at the least, shows an unusual human sensitivity to cosmic rays. Now, I'd like to get into these other ones, but I think, well, I'll read a little bit longer. Spontaneous EPS. Between January and October 1956, Dr. Puark conducted a series of experiments testing the capability of the noted Dutch psychic Peter Hurkos. Among the most significant were the following demonstrations of spontaneous EPS, all of which occurred before witnesses and 2 of which involved persons of good academic reputation. The object contained in a sealed package. 1. Professor C.J. Ducasse, noted ESP investigator of Brown University. I mean, look at all the universities in this. Gave Mr. Loring to submit to Hurkos for psychometrizing. What is that? Divination by physical contact or proximity of the prosperities of things touched or approached. New Practical Standard Dictionary, Funk and Wangdell. More accurately, the touching of the package enabled Mr. Hurkos to use it as the plus, minus, or means of interacting with the inside contact. Okay, so I don't want to, I'll let that go. I'm going to move on. A small pottery jar that was broken but mended, which was given to me in 1922 by the late Dr. Stevenson Smith, professor of psychology at the University of Washington. He said it came from the ruins of Pompeii in Italy, buried in 79 AD in the ashes thrown up by eruption of Vesuvius. Mr. Hurkos said, "This object blew up in an explosion. There was an explosion a long time ago. I hear the language. It is very old. It had to do also with water. I don't know what it is. I see a dark color. It is not straight, not regular. It very jagged, sharp points. I am sure of this. Dr. Ducasse didn't buy this. It was given to him and it was repaired. A souvenir. I am sure the owner of the cylinder is dead. I do not mean Dr. Kasi, he as well. All right, so to clear up some of my bumbling on that, the professor used a gift that was given to him for Herkos to touch and then extrapolate whatever he could from that. And basically he described loosely exactly what the object was and where it came from, because it came from Italy, it was buried in 70 AD, it came from the ruins of Pompeii. So even though Herkos wasn't able to identify exactly everything, having no prior knowledge to any, no relation to anything, whether it be the object or the people giving it to him, or even knowing about Pompeii, he was able to describe some very interesting details. So that can't be tested, right? And it's not inference. There's this object blew up in an explosion and it's very old, and how are you going to guess that when it's in another room or in a box or anything like that? My only theory on that is that perhaps he used telepathy, right? And they actually account for this, where now they have to remove the researchers from the room. So in this case, perhaps the people giving the test, having already known what the object was, where Herkos didn't actually perceive the location of the object from the object, but perhaps because people who were close to him in proximity of the object, who knew where the object came from, were transmitting data to Herkos. So we have a sort of a variation of telepathy, as well as we'll just call it touch sensitivity for now. Pretty popular name here for anybody in psychology research, and even in terms of the sci-fi world. Julian Huxley here. So Julian Huxley, the noted scientist, and his wife visited the laboratory on the 26th of August 1956. In this test, Mr. Huxley handed a sealed envelope to Harry Stone, who went to the opposite side of the room. Peter Herkos was too concentrated on Harry Stone holding the sealed envelope to see if he could get any impressions. These are his words. "I now go to the hospital room and I see a bureau and a blonde woman. I see a woman who lives outside of town, a musical person. A ring has been lost. The woman had an accident on the legs. I see airplanes and bombs. Don't forget me, Frank, in the Lillian Wood. I see writing on a photograph. I feel a woman." Herkos was wrong, but he realized that the picture described was in fact in Mr. Huxley's wallet and normally touched the test picture. Mr. Huxley affirmed that Herkos' description of the photograph still in his wallet, sketchy though as it was accurate. "A friend of mine gave Peter Herkos a letter sealed in a manila envelope. Herkos handled this letter and then made the following statements to my friend in response. This letter is from your wife. She seems to be in good health at the moment, but she will have trouble with her female organs." Herkos then drew a diagram of the uterus and the fallopian tube with a large mass in the center portion. Herkos then went on to say that in about 6 months the female organs would give rise to complications, which would require surgical intervention. 6 months after this reading, the woman in question began to develop severe cramps, irregular bleeding, and low back pain. At the Mayo Clinic, a hysterectomy was performed. The left fallopian tube had a large sealed-off mass. Let me see. I'm not sure I understand. I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm not sure I understand what the Huxley one. There's a few typos, so it's hard to... These are his words. "I now go to the hospital." So I'm assuming what happened is Huxley had an envelope, and what happened is Herkos read, instead of reading the envelope, read a picture in Huxley's wallet. Okay, that's what happened. So he was getting a reading off of the wallet, which means, again, just to my point previously, that Huxley could have been focused on the picture, which they address that as well. So in the further studies, as we get into the research from the 70s and 80s, there are ways for two different ESPers, one to use a tactic where he projects an image into the receiver, thereby obfuscating the intel that would be received. Which, if a lot of people have done research into what could be called the family ties and the family bloodlines, and the Huxleys I think, if I remember correctly, used to use MDMA, which is a pleasure drug, if you will. Just, I shouldn't call it that because it's not really a pleasure drug, but it was originally used, excuse me, was originally used for marital aid because it helped people lower their inhibitions enough to be more communicative and receptive in understanding of ideas and thoughts of the person next to them. Whether that was perceived by Huxley or later interpreted by Huxley as a way to activate ESP capability, that's possible. We know the pharmaceutical companies are involved in a lot of stuff, and with the history of the CIA allegedly running most, if not all, of the drug trade initially. Like I personally believe, I think there are different groups, one who are trying to facilitate it and open it up in people, and there are other groups who understand what it is. And like I said, you know, before any of this stuff was written hundreds of years ago, this stuff was passed down, whether verbally or encoded into alchemy, Masonic, and religious books already. So there's most likely active groups who are familiar with it and are suppressing it as well. One second, please. Why would I not turn that off before I started? All right, I apologize for that. So this is a couple more anecdotes of various examples of how it works, or how it could work. And I'll come back to this for part 2 of chapter 3. And let me just make sure I know where to stop here. So we'll say right here. Or actually, we'll go down where we were. So let me jump over, since we got a couple more minutes here, to the testing for cryptological aspects of ESP, an initial report, and that's this document here. The purpose of the ESP experiments described are threefold: to determine what effect human extraperceptive capabilities, temporarily categorized as telepathy and clairvoyance, could have on the COMSEC posture of the United States. The prime target areas being considered are code and cipher keying material in encrypted text, underlining plain text of encrypted messages, knowledge of message originators. I don't know that we need to go through all of this. I think what's important is if you have the time to read through these things, just to get a handle on how intelligently they were already taking, how seriously they were taking it, and how intelligently they tried to approach it. My belief is still that we're all being hindered now, and everyone's basically locked down. But, you know, I'm not sure how to approach that topically or as it relates to all this stuff. I think for right now, I think most people who haven't seen this material or are unfamiliar with it will have a new perspective on it, even after the first 3 or 4 chapters, or even just going through to find out that these documents are in fact legitimate. I have learned, I think about a couple years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there through the rumor mill was that all of this stuff was fake, and the CIA and NSA made it up. This was included in what was known as the bankruptcy of the Russian government, where the intel agencies decided to create a bunch of fictitious research and technologies that were taking place in order to make Russia try to catch up to what they were doing. And the reality is that you find, going through all this stuff, it was Russian research that basically informed all the American research. And it was also Chinese research in Xi and Jiro, and as well as you saw in chapter 2, the Japanese research. And then later in some of these other declassified documents, you'll see that they were all attending various organizations together. So that myth, that MAME, or that debunking conspiracy is completely false. None of that's true. It's my understanding that there are groups and religious groups who are actively trying to suppress this type of knowledge in an effort to position it as something related to Satanism or demonic behavior. And there's nothing in here that states that. It can obviously be used in bad ways. It is being used in bad ways, and people will use it for bad things, but that does not mean it's satanic or demonic. In fact, those two words, as they relate to some more ancient documents, older documents, are complete misnomers of the translations of those documents. And they're almost, in some cases, recodifications of other words and learning in order to create the false perception of what many people consider to be ascension or the light body, or whatever label best paints the picture of the endeavor or the religious or spiritual endeavor that you're taking or someone else is taking in order to make themselves better who they are. The other thing that doesn't get mentioned throughout here very often, not until later on in other documents which were researched on the part of the Army and I think the Navy as well, physical health is extremely important too. And in fact, the premise is that your body is a big antenna. So that's important to keep in your mind here. So let me just go to this other document. I want to pop this up here. So this is going to close off this video here, and I just want to put this up. I'm sorry if it looks transparent. My screen, my monitor's getting old. Excuse me, let me take a drink here. So I'm just going to briefly describe what this is and then try to patch it up so nobody misunderstands it. So this is modalities: knowledge accumulation and redistribution through extended periods. Right here we have modality 1, modality 2, modality 3. At no time do they need to appear in this order. What I'm trying to put into people's heads a little bit, or at least communicate through the broader visual language here, is that we all enter into this kind of stuff through one of these mechanisms or a type of it. The orange coincides with each other, the pink and red coincide with each other, the blue coincides, and the green coincides. Each description inside of these are conceptually related to specific types of thinking that we all, let's just say personality types. So let's start with the blue one because it uses language that most people are familiar with on the religious side as well as the parapsychological side. Casting magic spells, ritual and performance, symbols and totems. And then let me go through the other ones. So on the top orange here, we have convince and persuade, build the ego, master of matter. On the pink, we have grammar and rhetoric, logic and reason, design and the arts. And then on the green here, we have express, demonstrate, and memory. Now, all of these conceptually tie into what I'm calling sensation. All of these conceptually, the modality of possibility, the modality of sensation, and the modality of necessity. These are sort of the three modalities that all of our personalities operate at any given time. The green here represents the most simplistic way we approach it, and I think this is when we take away any sort of semantics or lexicon or jargon or anything related to any specific type of mechanisms or beliefs. Ultimately, we have one modality of always trying to express ourselves in one way or another. Then we move into a modality of trying to demonstrate our expressions, right? We demonstrate our expressions through ritual and performance. We demonstrate our modality of possibility by building our egos and other people's egos. And then If just say you're a learned person, whatever you want to say, logic and reason are the next way to demonstrate possibilities. The modality of sensation here is symbols and totems, master of matter, design in the arts, and memory. All of these basically fall under memory. We make symbols and totems to remind us of things. Master of matter, build the ego, convince and persuade. This modality, this path, so to speak, here is, I think, someone who's maybe, I would say, the average person among us. This is sort of where we all fall after we've gone through these two. This would be the empirical process. This is someone who lives by an empirical sort of modality of life. They like to, they're autodidactic. They teach themselves whenever they can. They may not be great at everything or understand everything, but they have a pretty broad knowledge set around many things. So they find themselves in a position when things are necessary, or when they want to make something necessary or think it's necessary, they convince and persuade. They build the ego, either theirs or the person, to generate the possibility of outcome. And then they're eventually master of matter, in the way that I would say we have the design and arts, because whatever you make, whatever you design, whatever you put out there, like this chart, for example, is, like I referenced in chapter 2, why architects have floor plans. It's just a way to remember the complex notions, or to further communicate them in a way that allow people to at least nitpick at them, right? Because you can't really begin to critique anything until you have something to critique. And often what happens is people are spending so much time critiquing, nothing gets done, nothing gets made, nothing gets produced. They're too busy trying. They're really still stuck over here most of the time. They're trying to convince and persuade someone. They're using grammar and rhetoric. They're just expressing themselves. They're casting magic spells, for better or for worse. And then all-encompassing, the modality 1 here, and is necessary, possibility, and sensation. And what sensation references is the end result of what we've done. The possibility is when we've figured out what's necessary and now we need to do something else. We need to either make something new or change something old. That's all it is. It's make something new or change something old. And then this is sensation is anything that occurs, whether someone likes it, doesn't like it, there's feedback, there's something that resonates in a way that is coming off of whatever came out of the end result of the possibility, what we made, right? You look at the building, using the architects again as a way to further this conversation. They make the building and everyone's like, well, I didn't think it didn't come out the way I envisioned it, but you did show me drawings of the way it was going to look, and I wasn't able to articulate that or really understand it, but I get it. And then other people are like, this came out exactly like I expected. I love it. Other people are like, it came out exactly like I expected, and I still don't love it. And then the paragraph down here, these really explain just loosely how to really approach this and read it. So let's just read the first one here. Again, I haven't really presented this to anybody, so I'm sorry if I'm stumbling over words and you're pinging back and forth. To me, it makes sense. I need to further elucidate myself on it and where I want to take it and how I want to communicate it, if it needs to go any further than it is. So what we must do or do intuitively. We are always expressing ourselves in one way or another, whether it's what we wear, what music we're listening to, how we react to other people is a form of our own expression. Instinct and intellect acting in unison, but pass by unnoticed, undefined. This relates back to what I described in chapter 1 for intuition, or what actually is intuitive behavior, where your instinct and intellect are acting in unison and they go by unnoticed to you, undefined. You're not sure how you did it. You don't remember maybe doing it. You don't know how to repeat it. You don't know how to reference it back. So let's move on to the second one here. What becomes of our endeavor, how we transform intuition into potential outcomes. And that's sort of saying, taking our possibility about X, whatever it may be, whether it be modifying a car, building a house, making a computer program, you have to get down and start doing it. Otherwise, you're just going to stay here. You're just going to stay here theorizing, being hypothetical, constantly arguing about something, or using words only, or being dramatic, or just expressing yourself verbally, or worse, kind of sitting in your own head the entire time. Even expressing yourself to yourself is a bad thing. You have to get down to paper and pencil, or what I would say ritual and performance in this case, where habits, whether it be an artist who draws or someone who cooks, whatever habits you have to sort of make something stick to you. Everybody's got one or another. It could be working out. It could be, I don't know. Those are actually the pretty good things right there. Aside from just being able to think about stuff, you got to know how to do stuff. You can't just be a thinker all the time. You have to have dexterity. Your body will benefit from it. Part of that is ritual and performance. I think a lot of the esoteric knowledge and even religious knowledge is predicated on keeping your body moving, because your body is a way for you to activate your own memories, or in other cases to activate your special gifts. All that stuff, as I referenced in I think chapter 1, the fasting or walking 10 miles, 20 miles, working out, really pushing the limits of your body in some capacity, or in a less obtrusive way, just trying to teach yourself a new skill, like, learn to write with your opposite hand, learn a new language, something that's going to make your body react in a different way. So once that occurs, you have to step back and look at what you did, look at what came of that, and then figure out how you're going to define it. So there's the possibility, and then lastly, sensation. This is the end result of what we've done. It's both what our potential became, what our potential now is, whether it be the building, the car, the recipe, the food you made, the story you wrote, your body looks in great shape because you decided to work out. What are you going to do to remember, retain, and repeat that? Contemporary methods of pattern recognition and transmission. So you think what you did was great. How do you communicate to somebody else now? How do you translate that into a way that is repeatable for someone else? I mean, these are heavy, heavy challenges. I think all of us, again, I mean, I don't think it's anything we can't do. It's just things that haven't really been communicated in this way for us to know what to do when those things arrive. And for me personally, I said at the beginning of this, the document's very abstract in what it is hoping to achieve, and maybe abstract in how I've communicated it just now. But I'm still, here and here. This art, this drawing, this labeling and sectioning off of text and color is my way of reinforcing my memory of how I previously demonstrated things, which were the result of my expressions. And that's where I'm kind of going with all this. And the modalities, just look up the word. It's easier if you sort of formulate and read your own way of modality. But I use that word because I don't think rule or process is appropriate, since in my interpretation of how intelligence works, it's all situational. So your modality of life is dependent on the situation you're in at that moment, and you're sort of a reflection of the outcomes occurring around you, and the persuasion and the influences and all those things. And yeah, you can be someone who's flexible and fluid, but at the same time, you got to know when to buckle down and turn all that stuff off at the same time. Or, in a more negative way, you got to know how to protect yourself from people who are predatory on that way. And that's where sort of this stuff comes in: symbols and totems, design and arts, being able to produce something that reminds you of what you need to know. And just to take that down from a less ethereal explanation of my own, I mean, that's all that religious symbols are. They're reminders. People would be surprised to know what things in existing architecture are actually mystical. They really are. They're old, ancient arts, like everything from your doorway, the way it's shaped, to the way windows are shaped, whether they're circles or rectangles. that stuff is ancient, mystical knowledge. So if you live in a house or a building or an apartment and you're someone who thinks that all this is black magic or satanic, you haven't done enough research, because you're living now, you're benefiting from that knowledge. It hasn't been expressed any differently. It's still expressed in the same way. It's just packaged up in a different way because of the contentions that people still hold towards old knowledge or ancient knowledge. So, all right, I'm going to end this here. Thanks for watching this one. I might revisit this again later. If you have any input or comments, that would be great. I'm sure it just really needs a better explanation and for me to dig down a little bit deeper. And for me, just to give you a little insight into me, I have to write or draw to test my own thoughts out, whether it be something I want to make with my hands, because if I draw it first, it's completely less materials used, and I've sort of refined my skills a little bit in my dexterity to be able to do that. And then on the other end, I try to stay in good shape to where if I need to do something by myself because I can't explain something to somebody to help me do it, I can still handle the demonstrate part myself. The expression part, it's constantly evolving. It changes with each generation, with each new variable of input that we get. Every time our modality is one way and we have people coming in with 2 or 3 other modalities, our way of expressing ourselves and the way we cast spells, the way we try to convince and persuade each other, the grammar and rhetoric that we use, it's all very fluid. Once we get into the possible outcome of what we expressed and what we're trying to do, this is when we start doing ritual and performance. We build a habit around it. We build a process. We try to build our ego and sustain our expression with demonstratable reflections of those ideas and notions. So we're writing, we're drawing, we're building, we're making, we're shaping. In some cases, we're destroying and reconstructing, we're composing and recomposing and things like that. And then finally, because sometimes that task, that journey has been so long and so hard, and you've gone through these 2 modalities or 3 modalities 4 or 5 times, including all this input and feedback from other people, or maybe it's just whatever you were working on was so complex that by the time you see the finish line, you don't really remember where you started, which is a common thing for everybody. I don't know if anybody's ever built a website or a program or anything, but you could be buried into 100,000 lines of code, and you need to know where you started and what you did. So this master of matter, where you're creating symbols and totems, design and the arts, the master of matter here is someone who is able to, in real time, that have a process or a system that they've refined where they can lay down their ability to demonstrate in a way that they can come back and reference it anytime they need. Or let's put it a different way. Say you're a pool player and you're really, really good, and maybe you're level 9, 8 or 9 or something, and you can run 5 or 6 racks in a row. The reality of that is whatever you did to get there, whatever processes you engaged in, for better or for worse, if you wanted to come along and teach yourself how to program, you just got to learn how to turn that expression of it, how you expressed yourself while learning it, how you hardened down and turned it into a process, and how you constantly reminded yourself of it, into the next thing. If you want to learn programming, then you just got to figure out what made you good at pool and why you like it. And I don't mean the things like it's fun or I like socializing with people or whatever, because if that's the case, then maybe you're just lucky, you're not actually good. But if you understand stance, position, the cue stick, the weight, the ball, the lighting, the temperature of the room, any of those things, you've already begun to understand that there's so many other influences around you outside of just your physical ability, while at the same time recognizing you may be standing up for 4 or 5 hours straight, bending down constantly, and your eyes have to be focused at all times. I mean, there's just so many different things. It's the same thing. You just got to figure out what's necessary in the programming for you to learn it, what you can possibly do and demonstrate in the time that you have, and then how you can document it and all, so that when you come back, you're not starting from scratch anymore. You can pick up on your last chapter of teaching yourself whatever it is you were teaching and then go forward. All right, now I'm saying goodbye. So I'll do what I do. I'll close off here with the next chapter. So chapter 4 is ESP, a special report on Soviet research. I'm going to check out the remaining 10 pages of this. I think it's not all anecdotal. There may be some statistics in there if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a part 2. I most likely will, but maybe I'll publish it at a later date so it doesn't interfere with the rhythm and flow of the rest of these, because some of these chapters are only 10 pages long and I can go through it a lot quicker. All right.